So welcome everyone tonight. So I'm the executive director of the Montclair History Center. I'm Angelica Diggs. We're thrilled to have you, our first History at Home of the new year. Tonight's presentation is led by Montclair Township Historian Mike Farrelly and Montclair architect Paul Sionis. So a little bit about Mike Farrelly has been our township historian since 2004. So, Mike, you just graduated your over 20-year mark and on the board of trustees at the Montclair History Center. He had lived in Montclair for 39 years and has been always fascinated by the history of the houses in Montclair that he walks by or drives by. And so much of his time is spent researching those homes and the people of Montclair. Tonight, we also welcome Paul Sionis, who is the longtime principal of the Montclair-based design firm Sionis Architecture that he formed in 1985. At the beginning of October this past year, Sionis Architecture joined with GSAPC, a New York-based architecture firm that recently moved to New Jersey. So congratulations, Paul. Paul holds a professional license in architecture, landscape, professional planning, with degrees in architecture from Pratt Institute and landscape architecture from Rutgers University. And he's tremendously and actively involved in numerous organizations within the Montclair community. We're thrilled that both of them tonight have joined forces to share the history behind the Van Vleck family, but also house and houses of the Van Vlecks. So some probably lesser known tidbits that we might be aware of. So we're really excited to have them join us tonight and share this with us. And I said this before, if you are more than to Pete one person, more than 20 miles away, put that in the chat. Feel free to use the chat during the presentation. We will do a live Q&A at the end, whether you can unmute or if you want to use the chat, I'll read questions for you. And we'll have a really great presentation tonight. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to hand it off to Mike Farrelly to get us started.
Perfect. Thanks, Angelica. As Angelica said, this presentation was originally given to folks at the Van Vleck house. And we all, I think most of us know the Van Vleck house on Van Vleck Street in Montclair. This is a picture of the back of the house with the famous wisteria entwined in the porch pillars. But the talk really expanded, and we wanted to talk about the Van Vleck family houses. There's more than one, and more than one that still are still in existence. Let's start with the progenitors. Joseph and Amanda Van Vleck spent their summers in Montclair. The Van Vleck family goes back way before them. Thielman Van Vleck was one of the first landowners in Bergen, New Jersey, which was a Dutch settlement in the 1660s. So the Van Vlecks go way back. They spent their summers, Joseph and Amanda spent their summers in Montclair. And in 1868, they bought 4 acres from Josiah, the estate of Josiah Crane. Shortly thereafter, they bought another 8 acres and they continued to buy property. Now, what I have here is not the full extent of all the land the Van Vleck family owned, but this is the land that Joseph and Amanda bought. Their son Charles and their son William bought more property that brought it all the way down to Valley Road. In 1872, the Van Vlecks picked up stakes from Brooklyn, and they moved to Montclair. Just to give you an idea of where this is, because this is the 1865 map. These are where it is between Valley, Claremont, Upper Mountain. Van Vleck Street is not shown yet because this is the 1865 map. It was not built yet. There we go. Joseph Van Vleck did put in a street. His neighbors decided to call it Van Vleck Street. North Mountain existed in parts at the time when they moved in. It was not there when they first moved in. It was put in afterwards in the late 19th century. The X is where the Van Vleck mansion is now. Just a little bit about the neighborhood. Uh, Henry Howe was the Howe House on Claremont Avenue. Henry Howe was the son of James and Susan Howe. And you'll see over here on the left, J.M. Doubleday. Well, John Doubleday sold his house and lot to Charles and Lucy Schultz. Uh, in 1896, Charles and Lucy built a new house. It's not new anymore, uh, called Evergreens. It was designed by the famous architect Michel Lebrun. And originally, when they first came to Montclair in 1872, the Van Vlecks lived in Josiah and Fanny Crane's old house. This is a different view of the house on a different map. They moved that house. It still exists, and today it stands at 50 North Mountain. It's owned by the Van Dyke Nursing Home. When they moved the 50 North Mountain, they built a new house. Don't have any records of exactly when it was built, but it was in existence in 1878. So it was built sometime between 1872 and 1878. It is not there now. In 1890, it was replaced by this house, designed by Josiah Cleveland Cady. But that house didn't last very long either. Let's talk a little bit about Joseph Sr. He was a partner and the treasurer of the Phelps Dodge Mining Company. He was a wealthy man. When he died, his estate was valued at about $1.3 million, and that was in 1903. That's when $1 million was a lot of money. When he came to Montclair, he was first he was the commissioner of roads. I mean, after all, he built a road. Why not be commissioner of roads? He was on the township committee, which was what they had instead of the town council back then. He was because he was the treasurer and an accountant by nature and by trade. He was able to put Montclair's finances in order. At that point, the Montclair was kind of in the township of Montclair. Their finances were in a dreadful state. He is a longtime member of First Congregational Church. He was a senior deacon and a trustee. This is a little bit of it is the basic family tree. You can see that Joseph and Amanda were married. In 1883, Amanda died, and Joseph married her sister, Belinda. We have some of the next generation. You can see William D. Most biographies of William D. Uh, Van Vleck say that he was never married, and that is not true. He was married for a little bit. Uh, he was a wealthy guy. Uh, his obituary says he was a banker, but he didn't really own or operate a bank. He was an investor. His father and mother left him a lot of money, and he invested wisely. When he passed away, he was worth $5 million. Again, when $1 million was a lot of money. The person he married briefly, Lulu Tyler, uh, she was she was a performer. She wasn't a singer. She wasn't a dancer. What she would do is she would recite poetry to live music on stage. I guess she moved around a lot. She was in charge of, I mean, she ran her own show. She ran the Lulu Tyler Review, and the marriage to William just didn't work out. William was also sued by Winifred Cavanaugh. She said that he promised to marry her. And he said, no, no, I didn't. But she sued him for damages, and she lost. Anyway, that's the life of a rich guys. Now, the Joseph and Amanda had other children. Unfortunately, Clara, Anna, and Carrie passed away early. There was a daughter named Frances, Fanny. She, by the way, was the richest of all of the Van Vlecks. When she passed away, her estate was worth $12 million. She also was married and divorced a couple of times. She married Peter Van Ripper in Montclair. They divorced. She moved out west, and she married a guy by the name of James Darden. He, when they divorced, he tried to sue her for damages as well. Um, he tried to hang on to land that she had given him, and the court decided no, it was her land. He had to give it back to her with the accrued value. Their son was Kenneth Van Ripper. Another child, Franklin, who also died young. Charles E. is somebody we will hear about later. He married Carolina Russ, and their children, Charles Jr., Florence H. Russ, and Helen. Another two children, Albert and Joseph N., died young. And one of the people who I think Paul's going to probably talk about a lot is Joseph. Uh, Joseph J. He was Joseph the second in this family, or a lot of times he was known as Joseph Jr. And he got married, and well, we'll talk about him a little bit. I did go to the third generation, not everybody, but I wanted to talk about Dr. Joseph the Third. He was also known as Joseph Jr. He was not a medical doctor. He was a teacher. He was a PhD in sociology. He taught at Temple University and several other schools. He was married three times. I did want to point out, yeah, here, where it says Virginia Aldridge and Louise Wilde. He wasn't married to both of them at the same time. When I made this slide originally, I only knew about two of them, Mary and Virginia. And just recently, I found out that he was married a third time to Louise Wilde. I couldn't edit the slide the way I wanted to, so I just kind of threw Louise Wilde in there. So let's talk about some of the houses. That's the 1890 house. These are two houses on Lower Mountain, well, it's now North Mountain Avenue, and a couple houses on Claremont. This was a house on North Mountain that he did not build, Joseph Sr., but he bought it and fixed it up. This house is gone, this house is gone, and this house is gone. So only three of those houses remain. Let's talk a little bit about the 1901 house that was located here. Um, Interesting. I had some notes on the screen, but the gallery is blocking it. Let's see if we can change the view. There we go. He built this house. Joseph Jr. built this house for his stepmom, Melinda. That's a picture of Joseph, the architect, Joseph II. He built it for Melinda and for William, his brother. Melinda died. William died in 19, and then Joseph II moved in. Joseph died in 1948, and Carolyn died in 1964. I believe you can still see the driveway to the house, but this particular house is gone. And I think Paul is going to talk a lot about more about this house. It's a very interesting, beautiful house. Um, it is now part of the parking lot for the current Van Vleck house. This house, number 61 North Mountain, one of the houses that's gone, was built in 1878 by Julia Mackenzie. Was sold in a sheriff's sale to 1887, and Joseph Sr. bought it. In 1891, he fixed it up and gave it to his son, William. I think I told you, I think I mentioned, uh, William called himself a banker, but he was really just an investor, and his estate was worth about 5 million bucks when he died. Uh, in 2000, this particular house was demolished. So that's why you don't see a color picture of 61 North Mountain. Got 39 and 49 North Mountain. Those were also designed by J.C. Cady, approximately 1887. And 323 Claremont was designed by Charles D. Marvin in 1887. Charles was a local boy. He was born and raised in Montclair, and he had his offices in New York. But he designed quite a few houses in Montclair and Upper Montclair in the 1880s and 1890s. Unfortunately, he passed away in the 1890s. This is 37 North Mountain. We all know it. It was been around for a long time. It's still here. Basically, it's this house here. It was the home of Charles E. Van Vleck. We now know it as the George. It's a little hotel. It's a boutique hotel. This is Charles E. and Lena. They are holding their two oldest children, even though the baby in front looks like a little girl because of the long hair and the dress. That's Charles Jr. The younger baby, the one that Lena's holding, is Florence. Charles was also called himself a banker, but he was not really a banker. I tried to find if there was a bank that he was associated with, and there wasn't any. He was an investor. He was also wealthy. He took his parents' money and invested it wisely, and his estate was worth about $2 million when he passed away. Now, incidentally, when he was building uh, 37 North Mountain, people were stealing building materials from the site. So he asked the township of Montclair to make him a special policeman with the authority to arrest people. And he secured those building materials for the house he was building all by his lonesome, by himself. They both passed away. Charles and Lena passed away in 1923. And the house, 37 North Mountain, went into the hands of Edward Weston. I am sorry, I could not find a decent picture of Edward Weston. I couldn't find it when when Paul and I first gave this presentation. I still couldn't find it. There was a photographer named Edward Weston. You can find hundreds of pictures of him and by him. You can only find a few cruddy pictures of Edward Weston, the R. Edward Weston, the guy who lived in Montclair. He was an electrical engineer. He rivaled Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. He was born in England. He came here. He designed a battery that was very effective. He set up an electrical shop in Newark. He started designing dynamos and lights. He became particularly well known for his instrument company. He made electrical measuring devices. This is a little shot of his factory. Those of you with good eyes can look down at the bottom and see that it says Waverly Park, New Jersey. Well, there is no town called Waverly Park, New Jersey. That was a section of Newark. It is by Friedlinghuysen Avenue and Hayes Avenue, in between the airport and Weequahic Park. Now, the buildings are gone. That's a picture of Edward again, his son, Edward Faraday Weston. Both of them were benef- very large benefactors of the what is called the Newark Technical School uh, for engineering. That became the Newark College of Engineering, especially under with the generous grants by Edward Faraday Weston, the son. And this was the first Western Hall of the Newark College Engineering. All of the Newark College Engineering became NJIT, and this is now Eberhard Hall on MLK Boulevard. This is not the building you saw earlier. This was originally the orphan asylum in Newark, but it has become the symbol of NJIT. That's the current Weston Hall on the campus of NJIT in Newark. So we're going to get back here to this house. This is 323 Claremont Avenue. After Charles moved out of that house and built into the brick house on North Mountain Avenue that he built, he leased this house out, and there were many tenants. I'm only going to talk about one of them, a guy by the name of Ezra Fitch. And I can see you guys stroking your chins and wondering who the heck is Ezra or was Ezra Fitch? Well, perhaps you have heard of a company called Abercrombie and Fitch. Those of you who are old like me remember when Abercrombie and Fitch, before it became the fashion giant that they are now, was a sporting goods concern. William Abercrombie was the pretty face. He was a noted outdoorsman and sportsman. He was the pretty face behind Abercrombie and Fitch, and Ezra Fitch was the money guy behind the scenes. So now we just have a couple more pictures. That's 37 North Mountain again. Another crummy shot of this is the current Van Vleck house. And just some more pictures. This is this is the 1901 house that Joseph Jr. built for his stepmom and for his brother, and that he later moved into. The house on North Mountain was torn down. The house on Claremont Avenue. The two houses on North Mountain, 39 and 49 North Mountain. Another shot of the George before it was the George, and a final shot of the Van Vleck mansion that we know. Now, we're kind of left with a mystery. The famous architect Henry Hudson Holly designed houses in Montclair. Now, most of them are not famous. Henry Hudson Holly's most famous work was this one in Llewellyn Park, done for Henry C. Petter. Henry C. Petter was the chief clerk for Arnold Constable department store. And he worked and slaved and put his money away and finally was able to have a very famous architect, Henry Hudson Holly, design this house for him in Llewellyn Park. Well, we know it better, that particular house, it's still there, but we know it better as Glenmont, the home of Thomas Edison in Llewellyn Park. Anyway, Henry Hudson Holly was a very famous architect, and he designed 4 homes in Montclair, but we can only find where was the fourth one. Well, turns out these are the 3 that actually exist, still exist. This is the solution to the mystery. Frances, or Fanny Van Vleck, the richest of all the Van Vlecks, had Henry Hudson Holly design a house for her. It was not built. I don't know exactly. There was no news article. It wasn't on the 1871, 1878, 1881, or 1890 map, but it is on the 1901 map, and it is on the 1906 map. So Fanny married a guy by the name of Peter Van Ripper. I think I said that. So it is Mrs. Fanny Van Vleck Van Ripper. She is the one who had the fourth house by Henry Hudson Holly built. Unfortunately, that house didn't last very long either. It was torn down probably in 1916 to make room for the current Van Vleck house. This is a picture of Joseph Van Vleck, the architect, the famous architect, with 2 of his kids, Joseph III, Dr. Joseph III, is on the right, and Howard is on the left. Most people in Montclair remember Howard. He was the last person to live in the Van Vleck mansion. And most people, I would say, in Montclair remember him. This is Joseph. Joseph never lived in, I mean, he grew up in one or several of the Van Vleck houses, but when he married, moved to another house on North Mountain. This is 128 North Mountain, and history buffs will know that this particular house was built in 1787 by Walling Egbert. And if you can't see it in this picture, but if you look over the front door, there is a lintel that is carved stone. It says W 1786 E, Walling Egbert, 1786. Just as an aside, my predecessor as the township historian, Royal Shepherd, grew up in this house later. Um, Howard studied architecture. He became a painter, but he really loved horticulture. So this is a picture of Howard in the garden where he loved to be. And he is the person who started the famous Van Vleck Gardens, the lovely Van Vleck Gardens. They're just spectacular. And I urge anybody who has not been to Van Vleck Gardens just to go there and walk around. It's spectacular. This is another picture of Howard later in life. That's him standing, smiling in front of a portrait of himself. And that is all I have to say for the moment. I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Mike. Um, I am going to recap and build on to what Mike just presented, and I will share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so I will be repeating some of what Mike said. Hopefully, I'll have the same facts that Mike had, and I always defer to Mike as far as the dates go. Um, The Van Vleck family influenced architecture not only in the immediate neighborhood of the current Van Vleck House and Gardens, but through other parts of Montclair, and I will be talking about some of that. So to recap what Mike just said, in 1872, Joseph Van Vleck Sr. leaves Brooklyn and moves his family to Montclair. Their 10th child is the future architect Joseph Van Vleck Jr. The original family house was at the corner of Van Vleck Street and Upper Mountain Avenue. Um, it was known as 59 Upper Mountain Avenue. It was eventually replaced with a new house and carriage house around 1885 to 1890. And then that in turn was replaced by a very large Tudor Revival house that was constructed only 11 years later, around 1901. The newer 1901 house was designed by son Joseph Jr., who had just graduated from Columbia's School of Architecture in 1896. So about 13 years after moving to Montclair, Joseph Sr. commissioned architect Josiah Cleveland Cady to design this new home for his family. 11 years prior to this, Cady had designed the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and we think that Joseph Jr. really loved those turrets or towers, so that was incorporated into the front right corner of this house. And in various publications, the house is described as shingle style with Queen Anne details. So 16 years after that house was built, son Joseph Jr., who was the architect, designed a new, much larger home for the family at that northwest corner of Upper Mountain Avenue and Van Vleck Street. And this replaced the earlier house that was on the property. And then in 1916, Joseph designed an addition to this already very large home. And as Mike said, you can still see two driveway openings on Upper Mountain Avenue, but this house was demolished in the 1960s. A few years earlier, in 1897, Joseph Van Vleck Jr., and we'll refer to him as Joseph Jr., partnered with Goldwyn Goldsmith to form an architecture firm. They formed Van Vleck and Goldsmith Architects. It's a little unusual for an architect to become a partner in a firm only 1 year out of college, but most likely Joseph Jr. brought a few important connections and clients to the new firm. And they received several important commissions just in Montclair, including this picture, which was the YMCA that originally existed on Bloomfield Avenue at the corner of Park Street. So to the left of this was the church where the Hink building is now, but this was at the corner of Bloomfield Avenue and South Park Street. And this served as the original YMCA. And the design and construction of this YMCA, which was built in 1899, was made possible by a generous gift from Joseph Van Vleck Sr. So that's how it got built. And that's how Joseph Jr. and Goldsmith were given this commission. They were also responsible for the design of the Grove Street School, which is now called the Deron School on Grove Street next to the ball field. They also designed the First Methodist Church on North Fullerton Avenue, directly behind the YMCA on Park Street, and also 37 North Mountain Avenue, among others. So Mike mentioned 37 North Mountain Avenue. This was designed by Joseph Jr. for his older brother, Charles Van Vleck, Esquire. So in the 1940s, this house was converted to a hotel for short-term stays, and it was named the Georgian Inn. And it was granted landmark status by the state of New Jersey in 2008. Around the same time that Van Vleck and Goldsmith designed this building at 37 North Mountain Avenue, the architects began becoming known for incorporating classical elements into their projects. So that included round top windows or Palladian windows, with the round top window flanked by rectangular windows, with leaded or stained glass windows. They designed many grand interior stairways, beautiful woodwork throughout the homes, and interesting front and even rear entries. This is the rear entry of what was the Georgian Inn, now the George. So they paid special importance not only to the front entry, but to the rear entries of most of the buildings. So about 13 years ago, in year 2012, a Montclair couple purchased this property and they painstakingly restored the building and they gave it new life as the George. And the George is now a 31-room boutique hotel. So in order to make the building completely accessible, so most of these buildings were not built to accommodate people with physical disabilities. So in 2012, this building for the first time was made completely accessible to people of all abilities. So an elevator was added. They added a permeable paver driveway at the front of the building for guest drop off right to the front door. So there's no step at the front door anymore, as well as a small tar and chip parking area at the southwest corner of the lot. Initially, these new owners wanted to use the carriage house that was at the rear of the property for an event space or an event venue for the hotel, but they were turned down at the zoning board. So instead, they picked up the carriage house, this extremely heavy brick-walled carriage house, and moved it from the back corner of the property out to Claremont Avenue. So it now sits facing Claremont Avenue. It's now medical offices, and it also hides the view of the parking area behind the George Hotel. So it worked out pretty well. Around the same time that 37 North Mountain Avenue was being designed by Van Vleck and Goldsmith, this home at the corner of Van Vleck Street and North Mountain Avenue. This is the southeast corner of Van Vleck Street to the left and North Mountain Avenue at the bottom of the picture. This was being designed by Van Vleck and Goldsmith also. So it's another elegant colonial revival brick home. And this house also has been lovingly restored inside and out by the current owners. Similar to 37 North Mountain Avenue, the design of the front entryway was given great significance with a lot of added details to that front entry. But the difference in this house, instead of the round top windows that Van Vleck and Goldsmith were designing in most of their buildings, they have rectangular shaped windows within recessed brick arches with these raised stone keystones. So they went off on a different path. They got away from the round top or windows or the Palladian windows for the facade of this house. These interior photos were taken, they're not terrific photos, but they were taken when this house was being restored in 2014, so they don't show the complete work. However, you could see there was again, an original beautiful grand stairway, plus a large round top window facing east, so it gets early morning sun, and it has this beautiful stained glass surround that all lets sunlight get filtered into the right into the center of the house every morning. My favorite Van Vleck and Goldsmith project is in downtown Montclair, and it's on the north side of Bloomfield Avenue. And most people say, well, where is it? And I always have to say, well, it's across from Cuban Pete's restaurant. So in 1910, Van Vleck and Goldsmith were retained or hired by Edward Madison to design offices and studios for an association of arts, trades, and related professions all under one roof, or all in the same building. So this slide shows a minimum of 4 different design studies that Van Vleck and Goldsmith did for what the outside of this new Madison building should look like. So you'll see in the next slides, the building doesn't look anything like these 4 studies, but these were the studies that they did to determine what the building should look like, and they were looking at different styles. They were, looked at round top windows. They looked at putting the rectangular windows within the arched openings. After they designed this building, the firm dissolved, and after the firm dissolved, Goldwyn Goldsmith went on to lead schools of architecture. So first he was hired as the dean of the University of Kansas School of Architecture, And he left Kansas and went on to the University of Texas in Austin to be the dean of their architecture school. And because of that association, the University of Texas Archives maintains many of the Van Vleck and Goldsmith drawings, in addition to photos of Goldsmith and his family. So you could see from this 2015 photograph that the completed facade is pretty much different than those sketches that they did for the building in 1910. So this is a four-story commercial building. It was constructed in 1912. This is considered Beaux-Arts revival style, which means it has a French influence. The exterior of the building is primarily brick, but it has these stone coins at the corners, but it also has these
I thought you were going to an 8 o'clock meeting.
that also has these horizontal bands of stones. So there are no round top windows, no Palladian windows on this project. This building is fun to look at. There's a real sense of whimsy on this facade. When I talk about this building, most people have never seen this. We don't know if this sense of whimsy came from either Van Vleck or Goldsmith, or did Mr. Madison ask for this? So on the decorative carved stone horizontal spandrels that separate each floor of the building on the facade, there are carved reliefs of Mr. Madison's face in stone, holding various artist tools. So here you see he's got a quill pen and a scroll, and elsewhere in the building he's holding paintbrushes. So it's a lot of fun. When this building was completely renovated in 2015, the stonework was highlighted with subtle lighting. So if you see this building at night, Mr. Madison's face is highlighted with very gentle lighting. It's kind of interesting and really whimsical. In my opinion, this is one of Montclair's true gems. Most people don't associate this with Van Vleck. There's a absolutely beautiful three-story central atrium right in the middle of the building that's topped with an oversized copper and glass pyramidal skylight. There are concrete floor balconies that surround this atrium, and in the floor of these balconies, glass blocks are inset into this concrete floor. So light spills from one floor to the next, and there are these absolutely gorgeous metal railings that surround the balcony. So back to the Van Vleck property. So as Mike said, Joseph Jr.'s stepmother, Melinda, lived in that main house that he designed in 1901, and she passed away in 1914. And then in 1916, Joseph Jr. moved his family into that large Tudor house after making it even larger. But by this point, he was starting to lose some interest in architecture, and he began to focus his attention to the garden. So he began a real interest in gardening this property. In 1916, around the same time he moved into the large house at the corner, he designed the limestone villa that we now know as the Van Vleck house for his older brother, Will. Will was 22 years older than Joseph Jr. Unfortunately, Will only lived in the house for 3 years. He passed away in 1919. So Joseph Jr. designed this U-shaped Van Vleck house in the style of a Mediterranean villa. It's completely fireproof. It's constructed entirely of limestone, and you can see a photo from the construction of the limestone walls. It's the round top windows are used again. I showed a few slides where they got away from these round top windows, but once he designed this house for his brother, he put those round top windows back into the design. He also featured the front and rear entries very predominantly. They're prominent features of the home. This house is formal and dignified. Even though the exterior was described as reminiscent of a Mediterranean villa, the details on the inside are fairly simple. They're considered colonial revival. Most of the interior is almost excessively constrained compared to earlier projects that Van Vleck and Goldsmith did. When this building was finished, it was considered a model of scaled down luxury. So for the first time in houses like this, the kitchen was on the main floor rather than being down in the basement. A central vacuum system was installed right from the beginning. The fireplaces in the house, the interior moldings, the wall paneling, they're pretty straightforward. If you go into the Van Vleck house now, you'll see this is pretty restrained. It's a simple design. In 1993, after Howard Van Vleck, who was Joseph's son, Howard passed away, and the heirs of Howard Van Vleck gifted this house and the grounds to the Montclair Foundation with a mission to support not-for-profits, or to support nonprofits. One of the first projects that the Montclair Foundation did was to make the ground floor of this building accessible to visitors and users of all physical abilities. So as I mentioned with the George Hotel, one of the first things they had to do was make it accessible for people of all physical abilities. The Montclair Foundation decided that was one of their first priorities in 1993 when they were deeded this property, to make this barrier-free accessible, in other words, ADA compliant. So there were a lot of discussions. Should they put a ramp on the front of the building? Nobody wanted to see a ramp on this building. So the idea was to raise the driveway along the side of the building up to the height of the floor level, so that the driveway is flush with the floor, so someone in a wheelchair could wheel right into the building without having to go up steps, without having the need for an exterior ramp on the outside of this building. There are two smaller buildings on the rear of this property, and they were built very close together. So there's the caretaker's cottage in the top left photograph, and Joseph Jr. designed this two-story caretaker's cottage. It's a two-story flat roof building, and it's very similar in appearance to the main house, the Van Vleck house. It's thought to have originally been used as a garage for the main house, and there's also a second floor residence, which was for the caretaker, and garden equipment is currently stored on the first floor. Directly to the west of this building, only 20 feet away, is the Tudor style carriage house. And this Tudor style carriage house was built as a garage in the same style as that original 1901 Tudor mansion that was at the corner of Van Vleck Street and Upper Mountain Avenue. So that mansion was demolished in 1960. They were each designed by Joseph Jr. And again, repeating what we said before, the mansion was expanded in 1960 for Joseph Jr.'s family. Then it was demolished in 1960. This carriage house is now the Smith Visitor Center and the Raymond Education Center. So there are classes held on the first floor, and there's a lot of historic images within this building. And then there's a residence on the second floor of this building. The Joseph Jr.'s son, Howard, also went to architecture school. So Howard, who was the last Van Vleck member to live on the property when he passed away in 1993. So Howard also went to architecture school, but like his father, Joseph Jr., he developed a real interest in gardening. And he slowly developed the grounds into the beautiful park-like space it currently is. And thanks to the Montclair Foundation and the Green Acres funding that they received from the state of New Jersey, this property remains as a public garden that's open year-round. If you have not, as Mike said, we recommend that you visit this property. Thank you. So I will stop my slides now.
And you can go to the garden for free.
Yes, it's free and it's
Gardens
open to
for
the
free.
public. It's just a
Open to the
beautiful,
public.
beautiful property.
Thank you, Paul and Mike, so much.
And those
Fascinating.
rhododendrons are amazing, and that wisteria is amazing.
Oh, the gardens
And
are beautiful.
Right.
they're really just some specimens of some very exotic and wonderful plants all throughout the whole gardens.
Yeah. One question just came in the chat, and for anyone who does have questions, feel free to use the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute, but I will read the one here. Joan said that they heard that the main mansion on Upper Mountain burned down. Yes or no? And Joan, feel
I
free to
don't,
unmute if you need
We
to.
don't know. We in the
yeah,
records I looked at, it just says it was demolished in the 1960s.
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thank you. I had
Oh,
heard that. I lived on Upper Mountain for quite a long time, and uh, I was told that it wasn't purposely torn down, but that there was some disaster, a fire or something, that rendered it unusable, and then I guess they demolished it. But I don't know if that's true or not.
Interesting.
I don't have any information on that. I just know it was, I came to Montclair in 1968 and it was gone by the time I came to Montclair, because I used to walk by there all the time and it was gone by then.
Right. Interesting. Someone also is asking, Mike or Paul, this might be more of a Paul question. Can you tell us anything about the builders of the homes?
I do not have any information on the builders. That's a good question, though.
It is a good question. Yeah.
They were craftsmen.
Yeah. I remember fondly. So some of my family lived in Montclair. So for, I can't remember if it was weeks or months, we were living in the Georgian Inn for a while before it became the George. Beautiful building, really neat inside. Yeah. Someone also asked, are there any familial connection to famed New York architect Ernest Allen Van Vleck, or just the same surname?
I had looked it up and I don't believe there was a relation.
Okay. Interesting. Oh, Richard, that's a
Oh.
generous offer. You might regret that. So if anyone wants to stop into 49 North Mountain, come knock on our door. Well, you don't have to tell the History Center staff twice. We might be there. That's great. I think, Richard, were you the one who's also said that the curb cut is still there? I think earlier on in the chat. I think so. When either Paul or Mike were talking about that.
It's definitely still there on Upper
Yeah.
Mount. Yeah.
Jeff was just noting that the mill offers a series of free classes at Van Vleck starting March 6th. That's great.
Right.
Yeah, the Montclair Foundation of Van Vleck also hosts a lot of nonprofit series. They do yoga in the gardens, they do youth programs. I know Montclair Community Farms does a senior wellness program in the greenhouse come March. So there's a lot happening there to check out. Absolutely.
I'd see that question, the Westons, connection between the Westons and Josh Weston, who lived on Christopher Street.
Mm-hmm.
No, they were the same surname. I mean, there might be a very
Right.
distant connection, but they were not immediately related at all. I did look into that one.
Jane is asking, when was the wrought iron face installed? So
The faces on the Madison building?
I
Or the-
think I think so. Jane, you feel free to type more there.
yeah.
And related to that, someone else was just asking, oh no, Jane said the fence.
Oh, the one that surrounds the whole
And
Van
right.
Vleck
Yeah.
Gardens? Yeah, they're beautiful.
And it's been
Beautiful. I
restored several times by the Montclair
Okay.
Foundation.
I'm sorry, did I say face instead of fence? I probably
Yes.
read that wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody, to add confusion. Speaking of the faces, so someone else is saying, is the Madison Barrett building currently being used? And is it accessible to the public? Actually, I'm not sure that answered. Anyone, you know?
It's currently being used and anyone could walk into that central atrium.
Really? I see. I've
Yeah.
never walked inside. I have to do that. That's really
Yes.
It was
interesting.
Madison Bookstore up until recently.
Right, right.
It's really, you wouldn't notice the faces unless you knew to look for them, I feel
Right.
like. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
And as I said, those lights were added. I hope they're still on after so many years now.
We'd have to go at night, right? Check it out.
Yes.
Yeah. David's saying there's one Weston building remaining at 614 Frelinghuysen Avenue.
Oh, okay. Because that was a huge plant.
Linda asked a great question. I was thinking the same thing while I was listening to this. Why did the Van Vleck family keep tearing down and rebuilding houses on the property in such a short time span? Anyone know?
because they were rich and they
Yeah,
could.
yeah, I thought because they could.
Because they could. That's funny. And then did Joseph Jr. design any famous buildings not in Montclair?
They worked on quite a few buildings in Manhattan. I don't have a list of those. I was primarily interested in Montclair, though.
Hmm. Thanks, Pam, for sharing that you remember shopping for school supplies at Madison's.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, um, Elaine's just sharing a family friend of ours was governess to the children of the Tomlinson family. How were they related to the Van Vlecks?
Howard married Betty Tomlinson.
Ah,
The Tomlinsons lived next to the History Center in the house. Well, it's not
right.
the house, but on the site where Rocky used to live, the
Yes.
horse.
Yeah,
Okay. And Betty Tomlinson was the daughter. She married Howard.
Hmm.
I didn't know that either. That is really interesting.
Oh, and I forgot, Howard was also very involved with the Boy Scouts. So I saw
Yes.
questions. Very involved with the Eagle Rock Council of the Boy Scouts. I forgot to mention that.
Thanks, Joan. Nice.
If I, can you hear me?
Yeah.
The, the boy, my godmother was married to this, married into the Haas family, Mule Haas. And they were longtime Montclair people. Mule Haas was a very, very famous baseball player. And my godmother's husband was in the Boy Scout troop with Howard. And they had the meetings in the basement of Van Vleck. And his father made the room look like they were in the woods
Mm.
with little wooden tree benches and murals on the wall and teepees and so on. And it's still down there.
Yes. Hmm.
Very nice. Any other questions, thoughts? Kathleen saying, was the entire Madison building used by Madison or was it offices for others?
Originally, it was used as a conglomeration of artists and printers, and his goal was to open it up to people in the trades related to artwork,
Yeah.
printing.
Nice.
Madison himself, Edward Madison, had a bookstore and he was a printer himself.
Yes.
And I think he was involved in other arts as well. He was a heck of a photographer too. I saw some of his photographs. Um, and
And then the carriage house for the Georgian Inn used to house Mountainside Family Practice, a medical group, until the early 80s. I didn't know that. That's
And
neat.
the French Institute was in there for a while also.
Oh, I think I did know that one. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm. Jane says in the southwest west corner of the property, there's now a ring of fire that the Boy Scouts have installed. Cool.
Mm.
hmm,
Hmm. Any other thoughts, questions? Well, Mike and Paul, thank you so much. Really fascinating.
Okay.
I'm
Very
sure
nice.
more uncovered each time you might do it. So appreciate it. Thank you for sharing it with all of us tonight.
I